Okay, time to review the Xenosaga trilogy, starting with Episode 1, Dwili Zu March. Despite Xenogears' critical reception and somewhat positive sales figures, Square made it clear that they were not interested in funding a sequel, instead choosing to put their focus towards their core franchise of Final Fantasy. This led Xenoseries founder Tetsuya Takahashi, his wife Kaori Tanaka, as well as several other colleagues to leave Square and found their own company, Monolithsoft, on October 1st, 1999, 3 days before Little Me turned 4. It was quickly decided that Monolithsoft should seek out a publisher to help make their games, rather than go down the route of an independent studio. They would reach out to multiple companies, with little success. It wasn't until they met Namco that they would find a publisher after getting the backing of Namco's founder, Masaya Nakamura, who shared Takahashi's ideals. Now with a publisher, Monolithsoft would attempt to work on creating their first game for the then brand new PlayStation 2. Xenosaga, as it would be called, would be a reimagining of Xenogears, with new characters and setting. Now with the power of the PS2, Takahashi would finally be able to make a game in full 3D. However, due to Monolithsoft's lack of experience, developing for the PS2 would be challenging due to the complexities of 6th generation game design. This can be seen in the game, with Episode 1 often feeling like it's not optimizing the PS2 to its fullest. One of the biggest challenges was creating a large number of pre-rendered cutscenes in-game. Kunihiko Tanaka, who had previously worked on Xenogears, designed the main characters, but his character's signature large eyes would prove very difficult to animate on faces. Another problem would arise in Tanaka's difficulty in designing Cosmos, the signature character of the series. Luckily, Kuchi Majutani, who designed several of the side characters and the mechs, would step in to help give the blue-haired android her half-human, half-robot look. Xenosaga Episode 1 was planned to be the first of a 6-part story in the same vein as Xenogears, and its subtitle Dwili Zu March, or The Will to Power in English, was taken from the title of a book by the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, whose concepts would be heavily used in the series. The subtitle was also supposed to represent the character's strength of will in the game as they pushed through the odds to achieve their goals. And with that, the game was set for release in late 2001, but would be pushed back into February the next year. The localization would again prove to be difficult, due to the game's dark tone and deep religious themes. This would result in one particular scene being censored in the English release, as well as the game releasing over a year later in 2003. The story starts on Earth, or, as it is called in this game, Lost Jerusalem, where archaeologist Dr. Masuda is conducting a dig around Lake Turkana, when an altar is discovered. Masuda finds the altar accepts a key he possesses, and upon using it, a giant golden object comes rising out of the lake. The story then jumps 4,000 years into the future, where we see the Federation starship Woglinde find a similar golden object floating in space and bring it on board. Meanwhile on board, Vector scientist Shionozuki, that last name sounds familiar, is conducting the final combat simulations with the android Cosmos. During the test, Shion sees a little girl, who she later sees again on her way to report the simulations to the captain. On her way to the bridge, Shion helps a fellow Vector staff member working on the artificial humans called Realians, when they are rudely interrupted by Lieutenant Virgil. Virgil demonstrates a lot of hostility towards Realians, calling them tools and inhuman before leaving. On the bridge, Shion meets Commander Sharenkov, who expresses great frustration on how far Vector is behind schedule on Cosmos. Captain Moriyama comes over and calms Sharenkov down, as well as telling Shion to get some rest. That night, Sharenkov contacts a mysterious figure named Margulis, who informs him that he is sending a squad to intercept the Woglinde and secure the golden object known as the Zohar. Meanwhile, Shion encounters the little girl again in her dreams. Shion is then woken up from her sleep when Cosmos suddenly begins activating. This is then followed up by a giant fleet of alien ships known as the Gnosis showing up and attacking the Woglinde. Shion desperately tries to get to the lab where Cosmos is, while having to evade the Gnosis who have boarded the ship. Along the way, Shion runs into Virgil and his team. However, they are no match for the Gnosis, whose out-of-phase existence makes them impervious to attacks. Shion is then caught by one of the Gnosis, who begins to drain the life out of her when Cosmos bursts into the room. By activating the Hilbert effect, Cosmos brings the Gnosis into normal existence and makes them vulnerable to attacks. Now able to attack the Gnosis, Virgil, Cosmos and Shion make their way to the escape pods, along with Shion's assistant Alan and Commander Sharenkov. At the escape pods, the group is ambushed by more Gnosis. In the fight, Virgil gets caught between the Gnosis and Cosmos, who shoots Xenosis through Virgil, killing him to the horror of Xion. Xenosis then escaped with the Zohar, while the remaining 4 characters escaped in the last pod. A while later, the starship Elsa shows up, led by a bunch of scavengers, looking for good finds in the Wookling Days wreckage. After running into Cosmos, the scavengers reluctantly offer to help rescue Xion and the others. On board, Xion meets a strange young man by the name of Chaos, who protects them from a Gnosis who also boards the ship. Following a mysterious directive given to Cosmos, the group decide to head to the planet Sekmilsha, which also happens to be Xion's homeworld. The story again continues from there, and I yet again recommend Oni Black Mage for the full story breakdown. Now with the hardware of the PS2, Xenosaga Ep.1 is a massive improvement when it comes to Xenogears graphically, with the game now fully in 3D. Characters and environments for the most part are well designed and look very good even when playing the game on a HD TV. This is especially true when it comes to the game's cutscenes, which definitely feel like they've had a lot of attention given to them. However, this ends up coming back to hurt the game, as several players, myself included, see Episode 1 more as a movie than a game, with the cutscenes feeling like they've been given more attention over the gameplay. The game has 6 main playable characters as well as a few temporary characters who will be playable in a limited fashion at select moments in the game. 4 of the 6 characters get access to a personal mech unit known as an eggs, while the other 2 have additional attacks. Unlike in other Xeno games, the eggs are never really required, and for the most part the game is completely playable on foot. Remember when I said Xenosaga Episode 1 doesn't utilise the PS2 to its fullest? Well, the ability to rotate the camera and jump has now been replaced with the ability to destroy objects to open up paths and reveal hidden items. This, in my opinion, is somewhat of a downgrade, as it removes a lot of the challenge from getting secrets, as destroyable objects will light up to indicate they can be destroyed with a single button press. Episode 1 doesn't really have side quests, but instead has an optional treasure finding quest in which the player must find 15 secret doors, known as segment addresses, and the keys that unlock them, known as decoders. These segment addresses will have treasure chests hidden behind them, and the treasure can range from top tier equipment to the multiple body parts which make up Erde Kaiser, a giant robot who will help you sweep the later part of the game. The decoders, however, are not found in the same order as the doors, and thus the player will need to backtrack to open up all the doors. Backtracking in Episode 1 is interesting, as unlike Xenogears, the game does not have an overworld. Instead, one must use the Encephalon, a sort of simulator that can be found around certain save points, to revisit previous areas in the game. The game also features a series of minigames, including a card game and an eggs battling game. However, I never really played these games as they were either lame or had no impact on the main game. Sorry to all the minigame fans out there. Enemy encounters have been changed since Xenogears. For one, the game uses on-map encounters, in which the enemy will appear in the world, run at the player if spotted, and, if contact is made, start a battle, similar to most Tales games. Areas in which enemies appear are often littered with destroyable traps, which can create blast zones which will weaken enemies caught in them, and give the player an advantage in the ensuing battle. The combo system returns from Xenogears, however this time the characters use a combo of melee and range attacks, along with special tech attacks, which replace death blows. The melee and range attacks all have different properties depending on the character using it and the order it is used in the combo. Tech attacks, meanwhile, are unlocked by the player throughout the game, and are assigned to end different combinations of melee and range attacks. All attacks require the use of AP, which replenishes by 4 per turn for a maximum of 6. Attacks use 2 AP each, and tech attacks are initially required to be the third part of the combo, although they can later be brought up to the second. Thus, saving AP will be necessary to unleash the character's most powerful attacks. Magic attacks also make a return from Xenogears, now called Ether for all characters, and work in much the same way as they did previously. Along with Ether, the booster system also makes a return. However, this time it is a character gauge that fills up by attacks for a maximum of 3 charges, and allows the character to ignore the turn order and act next. This is important as it allows the characters to take advantage of the event slot, as every turn in battle will have a certain event attached to it. This ranges from high critical chance to an increased booster replenishment. Boosting, however, is a two-edged sword, as your opponents can do it as well, and oh boy, will they do it a lot. Even going as far as to overrule your own boosts with their own, ensuring in fights your enemies will most likely be having 3 turns for every 2 you take. As I alluded to earlier, certain characters have access to mech units known as eggs, which can be manned in battle at the cost of a turn. The eggs can be customized to give them different weapons and armor, and they can also be swapped around between the characters. Battles also have a positioning mechanic where the player can either be in the front or back row, where they can take a vanguard or a support role respectively. However, during my playthrough I nearly always just had my 3 strongest characters on the front line. Once battles are over, players are rewarded not only in experience and items, but also in tech, ether and skill points. These points can be used, respectively, to improve tech attacks, learn new ether spells, or learn passive skills from the accessories. Tech points can also be used to boost individual character stats. This becomes a bit of an issue as it makes tech points way more desirable than either of the other two. Yasunori Mitsuda is back again to compose the music for episode 1, and this time he decided to go all out and got the London Philharmonic Orchestra to record the soundtrack. Yes, the same orchestra which at the time was also recording the soundtrack to the multi-award winning Lord of the Rings trilogy did the music for Xenosaga Episode 1. So, Episode 1 must have the greatest soundtrack in the series, right? Unfortunately, no. Despite some stellar pieces such as the themes of Albedo and the Gnosis, Xenosaga Episode 1 suffers from some of the worst music direction I've ever seen in a video game. For one, excluding the final boss, the game has only one battle theme. This is pathetic when you remember Pokemon Red and Blue, a Game Boy game from 5 years earlier, had at least 4 battle themes. The poor music direction is present outside of Battle 2, where the player will most likely be treated to overly repetitive tracks or just blank ambient noise. There are good tracks in the game's cutscenes, however, the gameplay music that most players are likely to remember is for the most part extremely subpar. Joanne Hogg is back again to record 2 ending songs called Pain and Kokoro. Both are enjoyable yet not incredible ending songs. In my opinion, a step backwards from Xenogears' ending song, even if Mitsuda has named Pain as one of his favourite pieces. Episode 1 would be the last game in the series Mitsuda would work on as the sole composer, and he would take a break from the rest of the Xenosaga series. This does unfortunately make Episode 1's soundtrack stand out when compared with Yuki Kajura's soundtrack on Episodes 2 and 3. Xenosaga Episode 1 definitely comes across to me as Monolithsoft learning how to make a video game as a new studio, with them missing a lot of the experience they formerly had with Square. While the cutscenes and story are strong, the gameplay leaves a lot to be desired. In my first playthrough I attempted to use the systems available, only to be crushed in fight after fight. Then, in my second playthrough, I learnt about the Junior Brave Soul trick, and soon every fight turned into a one-shot Stormwaltz cakewalk. The lack of focus on gameplay makes you wonder why Xenosaga wasn't just an anime. Speaking of anime, it should also be noted that Xenosaga Episode 1 is the only game in the series to receive an anime adaptation. The anime was done by Toei Animation, with Monolithsoft's approval. However, none of the development staff at Monolithsoft would be directly involved with the anime's creation. The anime was actually my first experience with Xenosaga, as getting the Xenosaga games in Australia is difficult, and while the anime wasn't overly positively reviewed, it did encourage me to seek out the games and play them. Xenosaga Episode 1 is not a game I come back to because I want to play it specifically. Moreover, I play it as I want to do the entire Xenosaga trilogy as a whole. I generally find Episode 1 the worst game in the trilogy due to its lackluster and unrefined gameplay, combined with its poor music direction, which in turn makes the game's soundtrack the most forgettable in the series. I only recommend Xenosaga Episode 1 to those who really want to play every Xeno game. Otherwise, I suggest you just watch the game's cutscenes, or the anime, as that's what Episode 1 seems to want to be. So, Xenosaga's off to a bad start. However, with the first game as a learning experience, I'm sure the next game in the series will be a lot better, right? Well, I hope some mystic powers grant me a miracle as I cover what a lot of fans would say is the worst game in the entire Xeno series. Xenosaga Episode 2, Jensetsu von Gut an Bois.